Hello, welcome back guys. And in the previous video we saw that we have issue with the delete functionality, not the delete functionality, but when we are going to delete some items from the book list, the message is not getting shown on the UI, right? So in this video we are going to resolve those issues, and then we will be proceeding with the implementing a new functionality. That is, of course, in this case we are going to design a page where we can be able to register some stuff, right? So without wasting much time, let's get back into code and we'll see how we can do that. So let's go back in server, and here in book controller we can see, okay, we are saying deleted successfully, which is of course a message, but then in data we can see it's an interface data, right? So what I can say here is, okay, in case of success we have two scenarios: either it is updated or deleted, right? Why? Because let's say in what I'm thinking, I'm saying you, in case of creation already we have 201 and then the response, so we can show that on UI, okay, saved successfully. But in case of update, even in case of update also we can say, okay, 201 and successfully. But in case of delete we don't have any response over there, status code over there. And if I'm going to say here as 204, that means there won't be any content in the body. Okay, so we can just assume that 204 is going to be used for delete all across the application, our server application. So what I'm going to say here is in the client, and I'll say here in interceptor, okay, if 204 code is coming, that means of course this API is related to delete. So what I'll say here is, instead of the message, since message won't be there of course, so I'll say, okay, deleted successfully. So I'll say deleted, not deleted, and then I'll say successfully. All right, but you need to make sure that throughout your application this code should be used in case 204 should be used in case of delete only. Okay, right? So I'll just save it and go back to UI. Here I'll go back here and let's see that in action if that works. So I'm just going to delete this Golang from here. It's getting deleted, but still we didn't saw any message over there. Let me see that. Okay, because status, of course a status code won't be there. So what exactly we are getting here? We are getting a status here as a 204, but then why is it not working? So we'll go back here in code. Okay, this time we are taking out a status code from from the message which we are sending from there, right? So this is fine, but then this status code must be there in that scenario. So we cannot do this way. So let's go back in server, and of course in the book controller here what I'm going to say is, okay, in case of delete, let's use 200 success only. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'll just return 200 only, and then the message will be there, but I'll just modify this success response over here. So if I'm going to modify this success response, of course what will happen is we need to provide that data in the method itself. That means we cannot change the method signature, right? So instead we need to handle it here itself. So in this case what I'm going to say is, okay, status code I will be sending as 0. So I'm just assuming a status code will be coming as 0. So what we need to do is we need to, of course, then what we need to do here is we need to put comment over this function. Okay, we need to document this function so that whenever this function is being used by someone, they should be able to know, okay, in case of delete we should be actually passing 0, right? So I'll say in case of delete, pass, not in case of delete, pass status code as 0, but internally I'll say internally it will be 200, and then it will just add one key operation equals to delete. Okay, so this way I'm going to handle this, and if you have other way around, you can do that. You are free to implement a new way of implementation, right? So what I'm going to do is here, what I'm going to say is, okay, if not like this, if I'll say status code equals to 0, right? If a status code is 0, that means you are going to say, okay, final response of status code is of course going to be 200, but there will be one more thing over here, that is final response of, I'll assign one more key operation, and I'll say delete, right? Let me just save it, and I will go back to controller, and here I'm not going to say 200, instead I'll just say 0, that means deleted. This is what the expectation is. Okay, so if you load on this function, you can see here, in case of delete, pass status code as 0, but internally it will be 200, and then it will just add one key operation equals to delete, right? So this is how we are going to make our function, and then other developers should also know what exactly is happening over there, right? We need to always document our function instead. So now it will be receiving 200, then we should be able to say to interceptor, okay, you will be receiving 200, but then check for operation as well. If operation is there, then use a specific message which is passed from here. So for that I will go in interceptor, and here I'll say 200 of course, and then in that case I just need to use if condition over there. What I'll do is I'll just say response dot data dot, instead of status code, this time what I'll say, okay, response dot data dot, okay, data will be there, and then inside that, what else I will have there, so I'll have operation, right? So if that is the case, and then I'll add one more and condition over here. I'll say, okay, response dot data dot operation equals to, or I can just do it here itself, right? So I'll just say data dot operation equals to let's say delete, right? That's what we defined there in the server. So I'll just paste this functionality now, and in this case of course deleted successfully should be there, and then finally it should be terminated, this switch should be terminated. So let me just save it, and we will check it if that works fine. I'll go back in UI, I'll just refresh this page, and then I'm going to add one more book from here, and I'm just going to put some random data, okay, and author is this, right? Let me just save it. It's saved successfully, and then I'll go back to UI, not UI but the book list page, so that we should be able to delete that page, delete that data, right? Why is it not coming? Let's go back in create function. Okay, it's saved successfully, but then okay, the data is actually, let me just refresh this, then that data should be coming here. It's taking old cache data, so you can see here it's coming, and then I'll click on delete. We should be able to see that message over there. So I'll click delete. You can see here deleted successfully. That is working completely fine. Now we are good with all those functionalities. Of course we have pagination left, and that we will do at the end of the course or tutorial, you can say, right? But for now we are going to implement a specific functionality which is related to staff, right? We have a bookshop, then bookshop may have lot of staff, right? So for that we are going to make similar kind of page over here, and then we should be having a menu option as well to add the staff. So we are not going to say book this time, we are going to say, okay, staffs, or you can say staff list, anything you want to say, okay? So I'll go back in code, and I'll be just doing the copy paste because we have created the code in a structured way, and we should be able to do that, right? So, but before that, we need all those APIs as well. So this time, not in the client, we are going back in the server, and then we need a service that should be related to staff. I'll say staff service dot go, and then first thing first, what I'm going to say is package is of course going to be service here, right? and then I'll say okay, type, since we are going to follow the abstraction here, I'll say I staff service, right? We should be able to hide the implementation, and then we should be able to call this interface method instead of the implementation. So I'll say interface, right? We all know that. If you guys are not aware of this, what I'm doing here, you can go back to previous video and then check that video out, and you should be able to understand that properly. So I'll say the similar functionality to book interface. So I'll say just copy it from here and go back to staff service, right? Here I'll just copy paste those functionality, and in this case, of course, create book won't be there. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to replace this book. I'll do Control D. Okay, it's not possible. Let me just remove this. Okay, now I should be able to select this book. So I'll say okay, just replace this with staff. So Control D, right? I'll say staff, right? That's the beauty of VS Code actually. You should be able to do it quickly. Okay. Now here couple of things you need to implement, not implement but import. So of course MongoDB driver you need to import here, and then finally what I need here is I need to define a struct as well, where I can implement this functionality so that that struct is set to satisfy this interface, and then I will be able to call this interface function anywhere in the program. That's the concept of it. Abstraction, right? Hiding the implementation details. So I'll say service, not service, staff service, and then this time it's going to be struct, right? And this needs repository as well. So I'll say repository, but then I'll say here, okay, import it using alias name repo, so that I can say repo.repository, not repository, what's that? Repo.repository, right? Repository, repo.repository, yeah, right? And then finally we should be having all those functionality over there. So I'll just copy this functionality from here, because we have copied the same functionality, so that we don't need to write it more. We just need to change its implementation the way we want, right? So I'll go back in auth service, not auth service, but staff service. Here I'm just going to paste that, and then instead of book, what I'm going to say here is you just use staff. And how can you do that? Of course you know, just say staff, that's it. But we don't have a staff repository over there. Why? Because we have not, from where this repository is coming. If you guys are new, if you guys are not watching this lecture from the very beginning, so you just need to go here. Okay, this is coming from repository, then you need to go inside repository, and then you need to define a staff repository over there, right? So for that, just go back to repository, and here you need to define that repository, and this staff repository is of course going to be of type iMongo repository, interface Mongo repository, right? And then you need to provide staff repository here as well, but in this case when you will say get Mongo repository, right? Of course DB name you will be providing, and then collection name this time is going to be staff, right? Let me just save it, and then I'll go back to staff service, and you can see everything works great. We don't need to do anything. As simple as that, right? Since we are following a certain design pattern, we are following certain structure in our code, so that we should be able to do it very quickly. We have designed all those skeleton, and on top of that you can just place all those strings together, and it will just work, right? That's the beauty of following a design pattern, or following a code writing a code in a structured way, right? So enough talking, and we are good with this stuff, right? So what else I will be doing here is I will just go back in auth controller. Not auth controller, we need controller for this service as well. So I'll just say okay, create one controller with the name staff controller, staff-controller.go, right? And then I will be copying all those things from book and paste it in staff controller, right? And then instead of book, of course we need to replace it with staff, right? So I'll just select this all book from here, right? I'll say staff. That's it. That's very simple, right? But then here we don't need book service. What we need here is, so even if book service is there, then why we are able to access this, create a staff on the book service, right? That should not be possible. That means, okay, staff service is there. So okay, the name is actually, the variable name is book service here, so we need to change that as well. So I'll say okay, control D, control D, control D, and then make it a staff service. But actually this is of type staff service only. Okay, interface staff service. So let me just save it, and then we don't have a staff there. So for that we need model as well. Actually we should be able to create model first, and then we should be able to proceed with the service and then controller. But since we have all the skeleton ready, we'll just copy this and paste this. That's it. That's very easy, right? I'll do okay, staff.go. Okay, now what this staff will have, I'll just copy this from here. Okay, this staff is nothing but it's similar to user, right? And then user is nothing but I can say that user is going to be owner of the bookshop. Okay, and then staff is going to be those who's working as, you know. So do we need that staff here? Actually we need to think, is that even required? Can't we handle those in a user itself? But this time we are just going to categorize, you know, user based on, you can say, certain fields. Let's say we define a field role, and we'll say okay, role is a staff, right? So let's do that. I'll do one thing over here. I'll just delete this stuff, and if you want to create a collection separately for a staff, of course you can do that. There's no issue with that. But I'm going to categorize this user based on a specific field. That may be anything, but I'm going to say it as a role. Okay, so that I can make you understand the least, you know, privilege principle. That means a specific API should be restricted based on certain roles. That's what you are going to learn, right? And that's more interesting. Most of the companies are following that. Most of the companies are doing that actually. So I'll just delete this staff.go. Then in the controller itself, if I'll go staff controller, we need this actually, right? But if we need that, then what else has to be done? So okay, we can do one thing. Just create this staff here. Okay, and then the staff, we should be able to provide those access. Okay, let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'll just say staff.go, and then staff is kind of similar to user, so I'll just copy it from here. I'll paste it in a staff. I'll just save it here, and then this time what I'm going to say is it's no more going to be user. I'll just control D, and this time it's going to be a staff, right? But then staff will have name, email, password, and then staff should be able to log in. So for a staff login as well, we need to create a login functionality over there, right? Because we have login functionality specific to user as of now. User is of course owner in this case, and this is completely on you how you want to design your application, how your logic should be, right? So here what I'm going to say, a couple of more properties over here. So I'll say okay, if that staff is active or not. So let's say if staff A is working in bookshop, later they might release that staff, right? They might, or the staff itself may leave that bookshop. Okay, he may go in some different company, he or she may go in some different company, or he may go in different bookshop, right? So for that what I'm going to say is okay, status would be there. So I'll say boolean, and then it is going to be status, right? And this time it's not going to be default empty. We need that status actually, and then here in JSON also we'll say status. That's completely fine, right? So I'll just copy paste here as well, and then one more thing I'll do here. What I'll do here is I'll say okay, status is there. So what else we need? We can have n number of data over here, but for the simplicity we are just going to put certain data or specific data which is going to consume less time, but you should be able to understand it more. Okay, so I'm going to say okay, status will be there, and then of course there will be you can say created by, right? Created by. And who is this created by? Actually this created by is nothing but the user. User is who? User is the owner of the bookshop, and this data must be there, created by. Without this data you should not be able to create any stuff. Okay, so I'm going to say okay, this will be primitive dot, of course this should be primitive dot object id then in that case. So I'll say primitive dot object id, and then here I'm going to say okay, bison is going to be, bison is the key which is going to be saved in collection, MongoDB collection, and JSON is going to be coming from or coming or getting binded from the MongoDB or then client. So here I'm going to say created by, or to be more specific, let's say bookshop ID. Okay, and this user is of course the owner of the bookshop, right? So okay, that's fine, completely fine. So I'll say bookshop ID. So here also I should say bookshop ID. That's fine, right? And then similarly I'm going to use it for JSON. So I'll just copy it and then I'll say JSON, paste it. Bookshop ID we should have there, so that we should be able to identify okay, this stuff is under this bookshop, right? I'll save it, and then we need couple of more property here. And what does that exactly? We need that created by, modified by, and then created date, modified date as well. So I'll just copy here, and then I'll paste that in a staff, right? And then we don't need created by here because bookshop ID is already there, so we need modified by. So if staff itself is going to modify this value, actually he should not be able to modify this bookshop ID. Instead, apart from that, he should be able to change all other values. Okay, so that's the expectation actually. So I'll just import this, and then we are done with the staff model, right? And then we'll just copy this here and paste it here, right? But in case of create we don't need ID completely, and then in case of okay, bookshop ID should also not get updated. No, actually that should be updated, right? So that's fine, completely fine. Let me just save it and let me just control Z, right? This need to be there, so I'll just at the time of creation it should be there actually. So that's completely fine. But then in modified by we don't need in the case of staff creation, right? I'll just remove that, and then created date, modified date should not be there. So I can just remove that, and let me just save this, right? So next what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back in staff controller, and then why is it giving error? I'll give, do we have DTO related to that? We don't have DTO. So we have created that DTO here itself. Instead what I'll do is I'll just cut it from here. I will create a DTO file for that, and that is specific to a staff. This is how we are going to categorize our whole application. So I'll say staff and DTO dot go. Let me just paste that over here, right? I'll just okay, this time this bookshop ID should be converted to string at the time of saving the data. So now I'll just click on save, but then very first thing we need to do is define a package for this file. So I'll say package DTO staff create DTO. So I'll just copy it and then use it here. DTO dot staff create DTO. That's completely fine, right? Now we cannot pass this staff, not book DTO. Actually, this should be staff DTO. Let me just Control Z and Control D as well. So I'll say staff DTO. Staff DTU, fine. Before sending it to save, what we are going to say is, since we have those struct data here, I'm going to say, okay, you need to convert it to what? You need to convert it into object ID. That object ID should be converted there. So what I'm going to say here is, okay, just make a DTU of this. Let's say actual staff DTU. I'll say actual staff, right? Actual staff, not DTU, actual staff, and then in this case I'll use model dot, right? And I'll say staff. We have imported model over there, but then we should have access to a staff as well. Why we don't have access to a staff? We should be having access. Okay, so no worry, I'll say staff here, and then I would say get me address of this staff, right? And then here I'll say all those, I will define all those property over here. And how can I do that? Let's do that here. So now this is staff DTU, staff DTO dot name, right? And then password will also be there, so I'll say staff DTO dot password, and then what else? So I'll just click on here, and then I'll say email will also be there, so staff DTO dot email, and then status would also be there, so I'll say staff DTO dot status. And what else we have? We have bookshop ID as well. Now this bookshop ID should be in object ID format, right? So for that, what I'm going to say is, I'm going to use primitive, but we should not use primitive directly here on controller, because then let's say if our application is growing, right, and then we'll mug up with all those import everywhere in the program, in the application. Instead, we should follow a certain way so that we can restrict those import at certain level. Either it is going to be repository or service or some other functionality, right, or some other layer. So that way we can make it more clean. If we want to change that, we can, since it's present on, it will be present on very less files, so we should be able to change that very quickly, right? So here what I'm going to say is service we have, right? And then service, what I'll say, okay, each service is having repository as well, right? So let's do one more thing. What should we do here? I will say, okay, just add one more functionality on repository, and if I'll make this repository as a capital, then this data, actual data, will get exposed. That's what I'm not going to do. So okay, let's centralize that in a utils file. Okay, so I'll say func convert to not small, it should be a private public, so I'll say convert to object ID, right? And here I'm expecting some ID, I'll say string, and then it will be returning primitive dot object ID. Now this way, if we want to change this, we'll just come here and change this. That's it. So I'll say okay, what it will return is return, okay, return, and then it will return what? Primitive. Let's say primitive. What is that? What is happening over there? So primitive dot object ID I'll say, and then I'll say primitive, right, dot object ID. I'll say object ID from hex. That is one function. That means it will convert a specific string to the specific object ID, not a specific but the Mongo object ID, right? So I'll just pass ID here, but then this function is returning two value. So I'll say okay, what is that two value over here? One is the exact object ID, another one is error. So I'll say obj ID, and then other one is error, right? So now here we just need to return if any error is there. I'll say if error not equals to nil, right? I will just say fmt dot, not fmt, I will say, okay, just break the application. I'll say fmt dot, not fmt, it should be actually panic. It should panic the application. So I'll use panic function, which is present in the Golang. And inside panic, what is expecting is any. So I'll say error, right? So application will get panic. All right. Now next is, if that is not the case, I'll say, okay, return object ID. Cool. Let me save it, and then I'll use this function here in the controller, so that I should be able to change those ID property to actual object ID. So here I'll say, okay, utils dot, and I'll say convert to object ID, and then this time staff dto dot bookshop ID, right? Next, what we have, modified by, we don't need modified by actually, right? In this case it will be empty, and then I'll say created date. So I'll say staff dto dot created date, right? And what else we need? So I need couple of more keys over here. So modified by and modified date is not required in this case, right? We have all those data, and ID of course will be, created automatically. So we don't need anything more here, and I will be passing actual staff data instead of the data which is coming from client, right? So this is how you can make it more robust. What I'll do is I'll just save it, and our create staff API is done, right? And similarly, if I'll go here and get a staff ID, you can get a staff by ID, you can see here, right? So in that case also we might have that specific ID, bookshop ID. So what I'll do here is, instead of get a staff, not get a staff by ID, but in the update functionality here, book DTO, right? So it should not be book DTO. What I'll do, okay, then book ID also we need to change, since it is going to be a staff ID. What I'll do here is I'll just select all this, and I'll say staff ID. Cool. And then here also we need to change book DTO to staff DTO, let's say, right? Save it. And then here also we need to say we don't need book ID, it should be staff ID, right? And we are good. Now what I will do here is, let me know if you guys are getting it right. So what I'll do here is, since map may have any keys over there, so I'll just check for the key. If not bracket, I'll say if a staff DTO, right? If a staff DTO of bookshop ID is there, bookshop, no, not like this, bookshop underscore ID is there, right? So I'll just say not equals to nil. Okay, if that is not nil, that means of course it is there. So I'll say staff DTO of, and it will be in string format of course, so I need to convert that before saving. So I'll say staff bookshop DTO equals to utils dot and convert to object ID, and what we are going to convert here is this data. And since this data is of course of type interface, so we need to typecast into string, and that's completely legal, we can do that, right? So I'll say it's going to be of type string. This is how we are typecasting a variable into other data type. Cool. Let me just save it, and it should be working fine. Now we are done with all of these APIs, staff related APIs. So what else we need here, right? So one more functionality we should have here is, in case of get all staff, we should be able to search all those staff which is working in my bookshop, which are working in my bookshop, not other, right? We may have n number of bookshop, right? But then we should be able to access our staff only, not the other bookshop staff. Correct? That is good way. So here what I would say is, okay, when I'll call this get all staff, right, we should be able to get my staff only, right? So for that, what I'm going to do is, instead of, okay, you can see here it needs to be only session context, so I'll just start modifying this filter. For that, what I'll say here is, I'll go back in staff and I'll say type, right, and I'll say get staff filter, or I can say just staff filter, and it is going to be of struct. Of course we need a structured data over there. And then what else we can have in this staff filter? We can have page number, so I'll say page number, right, and then of course it's going to be integer type, and then here we can say JSON. We don't need to play with bson here, right, so we'll simply say JSON, and in this case it's going to be page underscore number. And similarly we need limit as well over there, so I'll say limit. Let me just select it. I'll say limit. And what else we need here? So here we'll say limit. So this way we can paginate through all of those stuff as well. So let's say we have 1000 of stuff, then we are not going to show 1000 of stuff. We need to paginate through not one by one but by 10, let's say, or 50, right? So we are done with page number, we are done with limit, and then we have bookshop ID as well. So I'll say bookshop ID, right, and in this case it's going to be string, of course, but we'll typecast later. I'll say JSON and bookshop underscore ID. So in the body we'll be passing bookshop ID, and then based on the bookshop ID we are going to fetch all those details, all those stuffs, right? I will just save it and go back in service first, staff service, and here if you can see here we have create a staff, we have get all functionality over there and find all, right, but here we are passing filter as a nil, right, but this time we will be having filter as well. So what I'll do here is I'll just change this method signature, and then I will assign filter. I'll say filter, and this time it is going to be DTO, right, DTO dot staff filter. Cool. And now I'm going to pass the same filter here in the implementation as well. I'll copy here and I'll paste it here so that this interface will get satisfied, right? No more nil. I'm going to pass the exact filter which will be coming in the controller. I will be taking out those data on the controller. So let me just save it and let's see if that is fine. Yeah, that is completely fine. And then I'll go back here, and here I'll say, okay, instead of nil you need to pass one more property, and that is going to be filter. And from where those filter will be coming? Of course those filter will be coming in a body, and we know how we can take out the body. We can say, okay, just copy this here and then paste it over here, right? This time you can see I'm not writing all those codes, right? I'm just doing copy paste because I have created those structure before, right? So it is not going to be a staff create, it's going to be staff filter, right? And then not staff, it's going to be filter DTU, right? So I will be passing the same filter DTU over here and then nil. Okay, now there's one more thing over here. If you'll see filter, okay, filter DTO, right? So if you'll go back in filter, it is having actually bookshop ID, but the type is a string, right? But there we are expecting type as object ID. So how will I make this? Do we have any functionality here that this string can be of any type? So we can say, okay, this string can be of interface. No, that's completely legal. So from the UI, it will be coming as a string, but here I will be changing it back to the object ID, right? And that's the expectation, and it should be working actually. So here what I'm going to say is, okay, that's completely fine. Once you receive those, and I'll say if, let's check that, if filters DTO dot bookshop ID not equals to nil, that means it is there, right? And if that is the case, I'll say filters GTO dot bookshop ID equals to, I'll use utils dot convert to object ID. And how can I convert this? I know this is interface, then of course from the client it will be coming as a string value, right? I'll just typecast this value, right? I'll just typecast this value to a string. And how can we do that? We all know that. So this is completely fine, this is completely legal. Let me just save it, and that's fine, right? So in case of update also we did the same. In case of delete as well, we did the same, right? Now it should be working in the expected way. Let me go back. We are done with the controller, and we'll now there's time to map this controller with the routes so that we can finally create API. And actually that is the API. So I'll come back here. We need a route here for staff as well. So I'll say staff underscore routes dot go, right? And then we should have all those functionalities. So basically that functionality is nothing, but I think that is book related functionality. So I'll just copy it and then I'll paste it in the staff route, but we'll change the name and the function. So here what I'm going to see is, okay, this is staff, what is staff controller is actually expecting staff service as well as response service, which is the expectation. That's correct. So here what I'm going to say is, okay, let's repository will be there, that's fine. Book service will also be there. That is not book service, this time we need staff service. I'm going to say it as a staff service, and then what next we are going to do here is response service, of course we need, and then instead of book controller I'm just going to rename it and change it to a staff controller. So I'll say staff controller and staff controller, fine. Now we should not get book controller, instead we should get staff controller here. So staff service, you can see here, okay, this should be a staff service, not the book service. I'll say get staff service, right? Now this is completely legal, and here I'm going to say create, and this time it's going to be create staff post get all books. Instead of get all books, I'm going to say, okay, get all, not books. Let me just rename it once more. I will rename all those book. So I'll say d. Okay, I'll say staff, not staff, right? So we have get all staffs. We have, okay, book ID should not be there, it should be staff ID. Let me just Control Z and rename it once more. It will be staff ID, right? Update staff by ID. We have all those functionality created over there. We'll just save it. We are done with creating routes. You can see it's as simple as that, and how quickly we made all those CRUD operations, right? That is possible because of we are following a structured way, we are following a design pattern. So I'll just copy this from here, and then finally we have to register this route here. So I'll say, okay, this time it's going to be staff routes, right? And then I'll say, okay, router.group, okay, and this time it's going to be staffs, right? Finally I'll just call this function here and pass this staff routes, and then boom, we are done with creating APIs, right? Next what we are going to do is we are going to integrate all these APIs in our client so that it will be working fine. And for that, what I'm going to do, I'll just go back in client, and very first thing this time I will start with creating all those APIs instead of designing the page. So what I need to do here is I'll do just copy paste all these things, because the same functionality we are going to use, and then all of this will be related to staff, right? So I'll just copy this, and of course if you want to add more APIs related to staff, you want to perform more functionality or staff, you need to create more APIs, you can do that, you are free to do that. And if you are facing any issues, let me know. So this time I'm going to say, okay, book base URL won't be there, it will be staff base URL, and instead of this books I'll say, okay, it is going to be staffs, right? Now I'll select all this book from here and then replace this with staff, right? Now create, update, and then here instead of book I'll say staff. We are done with all those URL. You can see how quickly we should be able to create this, right? And then in API, we'll go in API, and then there's one thing over here. Either you are going to put all those APIs in a single place, single file in API.js file, or else if you want to split this further, of course you can do that. You can have multiple APIs file, and that will be specific to a certain features or certain functionality, and then you will be importing all those files in a single place, let's say api.js, and exposing all those functions. That is what you can do, and that way it will be very easier for you to maintain all these APIs. But for the simplicity, I'm just using this. If you want to follow that way, you can follow that way, and you see that if that works completely fine. Okay, so here I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it here, but this time it won't be get books. I'm just going to replace this. Very first thing what I'm going to do here is I will just replace all those books, not books. Actually, this should be get staffs. All right. Okay, and then this should be get staffs URL. I believe that should be working. Let's see, get staffs URL. Yeah, correct. So this time what I'll do is I'll just select book, and how can I do that? I'll just remove this. Okay, I will come back here. I'll select book. So now I should be able to select all those books, right? And I'll change all those at once. So I'll say stop, right? But there's error, and I'll say you what is the exact error over there. So we have get staff by ID. Get staff by ID we don't have. So here I'll say get staff by ID URL. That is completely fine. So I'll say URL. It will get imported, right? Here also capital casing is there, so I need to remove that, and then I need to import that as well, right? So even if you are copying something from somewhere, you need to be very careful what you are copying, and there should not be any redundant data, or there should not be any error in that, right? Then only you can copy certain things, or else copy doesn't mean anything, right? So I'll say URL, import that, and then here as well I'll say okay, don't use capital in case of URL, and import that as well. Now here get staffs, then get staffs is here as well. So what is the meaning of that? Okay, why we need this get staffs once more? Do we need that? No. Get staff by ID also we don't need, so just remove this. I just need delete staff, update staff, create staff, get staff by ID, get staff, delete. That's it. Create book, update book. Okay. I need that actually, and I'll say why. So get staff by ID should be there. Get staff should not be there. And then here, if you can see, we have create book, we have update book, we have delete book as well. And where get book by ID is where? Nowhere, right? So I just need to copy this, paste it here. Get staff by ID should be not get staff by ID, but get book by ID should be there, right? So I'll say get book by ID, and this is what we are using, I believe. Yes, this is what we are using over there, get book by ID. So that should be there. Actually by mistake we have removed that. So I'll say get book by ID URL, right? So this is replacing the ID, and then it will be working fine, correct? And then what else we need? Create is there, update is there, delete is there, and get by ID is there, fine. So here in this case, okay, get staff and get staff by ID, that is there. So I'll just cut it from here. Create is there, update is there, delete is there, get staff by ID is there. So create, update, delete, and get is also there. So then this should be working fine, I believe. I'll just do staff and I'll just import this. So it should be working fine. Staff URL, yeah, we are good now. So one more thing I'll do is I'll just comment this and I can say staff APIs, right? And then I can enclose that here as well, so that we should be able to categorize that. Okay, this is going to be staff URL. So staff API, not URL, but the API. So I'll say staff API. Let me just save it. We are done with the staff APIs. Okay, we have book APIs there as well. Now we need related action as well, but we know that if we are going to introduce certain functionality, of course we should have a store for that, so that our app will be more modular, right? It is completely optional. If you don't want to use in that way, you can omit that. You can create all those fields in any one of these store, but then that will be messy actually. You won't be able to categorize those easily, and at some point of time you are going to mug up yourself and it will be very hard to debug all those things, right? Since we are following monolithic architecture, and if application grows, of course the maintenance of code should be there properly, so that you should be able to get it or debug it properly. All right, so here I'm going to introduce one more folder, and this time I'll say staff store. All right, and then what I'll do here is I'll just click on this, press shift, and I'll click last file. Copy this from here, go back in staff store folder and paste it there. Fine. Now here, if I'll go back in action, before going back in action, I'll say just go back in state, and here instead of books you can say staffs. All right, and here you can say opened staff, let's say. And this opened staff will be using when we are going to click on view icon in the staff list. So we'll be using this. And then one more thing, so when staff itself is login, then those data, of course those data will be there in where, in the auth, I believe. Okay, so that's completely fine. I'll say open staff, and then let's maintain that staff data here itself, or else we can maintain, okay, let it be in auth store itself. So we'll just discuss on that later. So I'll just save it, and then here every places instead of books it should be staff actually. Okay, so what I'll do here is I'll just select book, and then I'll try to replace that. And for that what I'm going to do is, okay, this time I'll select this one, so that it will check for the specific word only. Right, now I'll say staff, not staff this way, staff, right? Fine. Now the books should not be there. Instead of books it should be staffs, right? And then of course we have book. Okay, we don't need this book now. Book should be replaced with staff, right? Now we have all those things in place, and we are good with this, right? We are good with all the mutation functions. Now similarly we need to apply those functionality over here, and in this case I'm going to say instead of book data, let's change it to staff data. So I'll say okay, staff data, and we are good with this. And then finally we are going to replace all those book with the staff. So how can I do that? I'll just select this, do Control D, it will select all those book word, and then I'll say staff, right? So now this is changed to staff, and then here what I'm going to say is, okay, this is related to staff, so you need to change this book to staff as well. So I'll say Control D, and then you can say staff, right? That is the mutation name you have defined in the mutation file. That's completely legal here, and we are okay. Instead of book you can say this also, you need to replace. So instead of book you can say staff, right? So now we are good with this all data, and this should be working fine. We have actions, we have getters, we have index, all those functionality. ready in place. And then next what you need to do is you need to go in the views folder actually, and there you need to define all those files, and that is of course going to be a view file so that you will be able to see the user interface. So this time not books, I'm going to say new folder, and it's going to be staff, right? And then inside staff we are going to create two files over there. One is going to be staff underscore list dot view, and then one more file we'll be having is staff underscore add dot view. All right, and then we have two file over here. Very first thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to define template over here, so I'll say template, right? And then here I'll say okay staff add, right? Let me save it and we'll come back here after some time. And then for now I'm just going to use h2 tag and I'll say staff add, right? And that's fine. Now I'll come back in a staff list, and what I'll do here is I will just say staff list, but this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a couple of components from gin-gonic so that the page should be designed in certain way, right? So for that what we are going to do is we are going to go back in the book list page and we'll just copy the design, right? Because we are going to follow similar kind of functionality. So iron page should be there, iron content should be there, and then okay, let's copy this whole template over there and we'll remove which we don't need there. Okay, so I'll go back in staff list. Here I'll say okay, just replace this here, and then this time we need this button and all, but we'll define those all buttons later. So remove it for now, we'll introduce that later, we'll design that in the upcoming videos, but for now I'm going to keep it like this. And in this case we don't have book, so I'll replace this book with staff, so I'll just select this all with staff, right? So next what we need to do is we need to import all those components. So what I'll do here is again I will go back to book list so that we should have all those components ready over there. I will copy this import, or instead of that let's just copy those all functionalities since it's very small functionality, and I will paste it over there, but I will just remove those book name with the staff. So I'll go back here and inside script I will say okay, let's paste it. Okay, we don't need two script over there, I'll just paste it here. So this is the way we are going to design our interface, user interface, but in this case we are no more going to use bookstore, but in this case it will be of course let me just select it, and this time we will say since we are making functionality related to staff, so I'll say staff, and of course we saw that we created store related to staff. So I'll just save it, and then instead of books I'm going to rename it to staffs, right? Then it should be working fine actually. And then book should also be changed to staff, right? So I'll say staff, not staff. Let me just save it and see if that works. Now in this case I'm not going to route to add book, I'm going to add a staff page, right? Add a staff page. Now we have all those design present over there, right? We just need to use this. Do we have this fetch all stuff over there? Yes, we do have. And then here this time we don't need email, we need a staff name. That's completely fine, right? So we are good with this staff list. At least we should be able to see staff list in this video. So for that, now we are done with this component designing, not component but the page designing. Next what we need to do is we need to map this page to a certain route so that we should be able to route to a staff list page. And how we can do that? Of course we need to have a menu option over there to route to a staff list page, and where we need to say that, where we need to put that item, we need to put that item here. If user is logged in, then only we are going to show those items, and then that is going to be inside VL's block. We all know that, right? So this time what I'm going to say is, okay, this needs to be actually here. I'll copy this and I will paste it here, and this time I'm going to say, okay, staffs, okay, and then instead of book list I'm going to say staff list over here, staff list, right? And then this staff list should be actually defined on a constant. But before that, what I'm going to say here is, okay, just use this staff, no, this staff list, right? Staff list text, you can say staff list text, and then staff list text. Okay, now I'm just going to copy this and paste this over here so that the same name is going to be used here in the iron item. Okay, and then we should be able to see the staff related text which we have defined over there. So I'll just copy this here and I'll import that as well. Now before using that, I will go back in constant file, and we all know that we should define those text over here as well. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'll just copy this and paste it here, right? It's nothing but simply defining the function or constant, you can say. Here I'll say, okay, staff, and I'll say list, right? I'll save it and go back on home page. Now we have that options ready in the menu item, correct? And we should be able to click that option, then it should redirect to a staff list page, but that will not happen now. Why? Because we have the design ready, we have that page ready, but then we need to map that page to a specific router as well, and that we already know. So for doing so, what we can do is we can go inside router file, and there we need to define that route. And how can we do that? We are going to copy this here and then paste it here, and this time it is not going to be books, but this time it is going to be staffs. And here also I'm going to say staff list, and here it is going to be staff, right? And here also I'm going to say staff add, but then we need to change the component as well so that the specific page should render over there, not the book list. So here I'll say staff, and then we have the staff folder over there, right? Staff, yes. So here also I'll say staff list, which is the actual name of the page, staff list.view, and in the add case I will say staff.view. Now let me just save it, and then we should, okay, there's some error, and what is the exact error over there? So failed to import, that means add staff page does not exist. So we just need to rename it to add staff, not the staff add. So we need to just follow a certain pattern. We cannot do anything which we want. Okay, so let me just save it once more and see if that works. Still we are getting error, and why is that so? Add staff is there. Okay, so folder name is not book, folder name is staff. So let me save it once more, and then it is working fine. And how can we test that? Let's go back on UI, and there we will see if it is working fine. Let me refresh the page and see if it is working. Again we are getting no record found. Why is that so? Okay, let's see that if something is breaking. No, nothing is breaking over there. Book get all books is there, that's completely fine. It should be working, but then you can see a staff list page over there, right? So once I'll click on logout, all those options that we are showing in menu has gone, and that's completely fine. So I'll just remove this, and then I'll re-log in and see if that works once more. So I'll say the dusan21@gmail.com, and then password is going to be password, and I'll say login. You can see login is successful, and it is getting here, but then there's something breaking, and that is of course going to be certain function. API.getBooks is not a function. That means we did some changes over there, and that will reflect here. We don't have get books functionality over there, and that is expected, right? So create stuff is there, update is there, but where is get books? Probably we have deleted that, so it will be get books, right? And then of course we need to just copy this and paste it over there. So let me just copy this and paste it here, and then this time we are going to say okay, get books URL, and it should be working fine now. But the similar functionality will be there for stuff as well, otherwise it will break as well. So I'll say get stuff in this case, and then instead of get books URL I'll say get stuffs URL, and then it should be working fine, I believe. Let's go back to UI and then check if that works. So you can see we are able to load all those data related to books, and then if I'll click on stuff list page, we should be able to load that page, and of course that data will be coming as empty because there's no record of stuff. So I'll just click on stuff. You can see we have loaded those data here, but then the data is not coming since we have not integrated our model over there, not model but the app table over there, right? So guys, that is it for this video. But if I'll come back in network tab, we can see get all books is getting still called, and actually this time this should not be get all books, it should be triggering those functionality related to fetch all stuffs, right? So that we will see in upcoming videos, we'll see in the next videos. And till now, if you guys are having any issues, please let me know in the comment section. I will try to address all those issues as early as possible. Thank you guys, we'll meet in the next video.